Lady Valith Sarnthar had lived for 312 years. And in all that time she had never felt so insulted as she did on the day the Emperor told her she would marry a human. She stood in the throne room of the crystalline palace, her silver scales catching the light of 1,000 floating lanterns. And she could not believe what she was hearing. "This alliance is necessary," the Emperor said, his voice echoing through the vast chamber. "The humans control the trade routes we need, and they have asked for a marriage to seal our agreement." "Then let someone else marry one of them," Valith replied, keeping her voice steady even as anger burned inside her. "I am an admiral of the Imperial Fleet, third in line to the throne, a duchess of the highest order, which is exactly why it must be you," the Emperor answered. "They want proof that we take this alliance seriously, and nothing proves that more than giving them someone of your status." Valith wanted to argue more, but she knew the look in the Emperor's eyes, and she knew that this was not a request but a command. 2 weeks later, she stood in the docking bay of her flagship, the Sovereign's Will, and watched the human shuttle approach. The Aldrani were a proud species, and they had good reason for their pride, because they had ruled this region of space for over 5,000 years, and their technology was among the most advanced in the known galaxy, and their warriors were feared across 100 star systems. Humans, on the other hand, had only discovered faster than light travel 2 centuries ago, and they were still considered newcomers to the galactic community, and most species looked at them the way adults look at children who have wandered into a room where they do not belong. The shuttle landed, and the doors opened, and Valith got her first look at the man she would be forced to call husband. Commander James Chun was not impressive by any standard she could think of, and he was short compared to an Aldrani, and his skin was soft and brown, and he had no scales or claws or any natural weapons at all, and his eyes were a simple dark color with none of the inner fire that Aldrani eyes possessed. He carried a single bag over his shoulder, and he walked toward her with a calm expression, and when he reached her, he bowed in the Aldrani fashion, which surprised her because most humans did not bother to learn such things. "Lady Valith," he said, and his pronunciation of her name was almost perfect. "I am honored to meet you, Commander Chen," she replied, and she did not bother to hide the coldness in her voice. "Welcome aboard my ship." They walked through the corridors together, and Valith noticed that he looked at everything with quiet interest, but he did not ask foolish questions or make the kind of obvious comments that she had expected. When they reached the quarters that had been prepared for him, she stopped and turned to face him. "I want to be clear about something," she said. "This marriage is political and nothing more, and I have no interest in pretending otherwise. And you will have your quarters, and I will have mine, and we will appear together at official functions as required, but beyond that, I expect nothing from you." James nodded slowly, and there was no anger or hurt in his expression, which surprised her because she had expected him to be offended. "I understand," he said, "and I appreciate your honesty, because it is better than false politeness. And I want you to know that I did not ask for this marriage either, but I will do my best to be a good partner to you in whatever way you will allow." "I doubt there will be much you can offer," Valith said, "but we shall see." She turned and walked away without another word. Over the following weeks, Valith did her best to ignore her new husband, but she found that this was harder than she expected because James Chun seemed to be everywhere. He learned the Aldrani language with a speed that amazed her tutors, and within a month he was speaking it fluently and reading their ancient texts, and she overheard one of her officers say that he had never seen anyone learn so quickly. He also made a habit of walking through the ship and talking to the crew, and he remembered every name and every face, and he asked about their families and their homes and their traditions, and the crew Members who had initially looked at him with suspicion began to warm to him one evening. Valeth was reviewing tactical reports in her private study when there was a knock at her door. "Enter," she said. And she was surprised to see James standing there, with a data tablet in his hands. "I apologize for disturbing you," he said, "but I was reviewing the patrol routes for the outer sectors and I noticed something that concerned me." Valeth raised an eyebrow because she had not expected him to be interested in military matters. "Show me," she said. He walked over and placed the tablet on her desk and pointed to a series of markings on the map. "These 3 routes all converge at this point," he said, "and if an enemy force knew about this, they could wait here and intercept multiple patrols at once before any of them could call for help." Valeth looked at the map, and she felt a flash of irritation because he was right, as she had not noticed this herself. "That is a valid observation," she admitted reluctantly. "I will have the routes adjusted." James nodded and turned to leave, but she stopped him with a question. "Where did you learn to read tactical maps?" He paused at the door, and there was something in his eyes that she had not seen before. Something old and tired and sad. "I spent 15 years in the frontier wars before I became a diplomat," he said. "Earth was not always the peaceful place it is now. And I learned many things during those years that I wish I could forget." He left without saying anything more, and Valeth sat alone in her study and thought about what he had said. She had assumed that humans were soft and weak because their lives were so short and their bodies were so fragile. But she realized now that she knew almost nothing about them or their history. Perhaps there was more to Commander James Chun than she had thought, but he was still human, still temporary, still a political necessity that she would endure until the Alliance no longer required it. She pushed the thought aside and returned to her work. She had no way of knowing that in less than a year, everything she believed about humans would be proven wrong, and the man she looked down on would become the greatest hero her empire had ever seen. The warning came on a morning like any other, and it changed everything. Valeth was on the command deck of the Sovereigns. When her communications officer turned to her with a face that had gone pale beneath his silver scales. "Admiral," he said, and his voice was shaking, "we are receiving emergency transmissions from the quarantine barrier, and they say that the Vreth have returned." The bridge went silent, and Valeth felt her blood turn cold, because every child in the Aldrani Empire knew the stories of the Vreth 1,000 years ago. The Vreth collective had swept across the galaxy like a plague of hungry insects, and they had destroyed entire civilizations and consumed whole worlds, and it had taken an alliance of every spacefaring species to finally push them back and seal them behind the quarantine barrier for 1,000 years. That barrier had held in the Vreth had been nothing more than a nightmare from history books. Now they were back. "How many ships?" Valeth asked. "The reports are confused," the officer replied, "but the estimates suggest at least 300. Capital vessels have already crossed the barrier, and more are coming." Valeth immediately sent word to the Imperial High Command, and within days, the response came back with orders that she was to join the defensive fleet at Meridian Gate, the largest military installation in the outer sectors. She found James in the observation deck before they departed, and he was staring out at the stars with a thoughtful expression. "You have heard the news," she said. "And it was not a question." "I have," he replied. "The Vreth, the ancient enemy, the devourers of worlds. And now they have returned to finish what they started 1,000 years ago. The fleet will stop them," Valeth said. But even she could hear the uncertainty in her own voice. "We have 900 warships gathering at Meridian Gate, and our technology has advanced greatly since the last war." James turned to look at her, and there was something in his eyes that she did not understand. "I hope you are right," he said. But in my experience, enemies that have been quiet for a long time usually come back stronger than before, because they have had time to learn and adapt and prepare. Valith wanted to argue with him, but she found that she could not, because the same fear was already growing in her own heart. The Battle of Meridian Gate began 3 days later, and it was over in 4 hours. Valith stood on her command deck and watched as the Aldrani fleet, the pride of the Empire, was torn apart like paper in a storm of wrath. Ships were massive and black, and they moved with a terrible grace, and their weapons cut through Aldrani shields as if they were not even there. She watched as the flagship of Admiral Torvath exploded in a ball of fire, and she watched as cruiser after cruiser was destroyed, and she gave orders and tried to coordinate a defense, but there was nothing she could do because the enemy was simply too powerful. All ships retreat, she finally commanded, and the words tasted like ash in her mouth. Fall back to the nearest inhabited system and regroup. The retreat was chaos and panic, and Valith saw ships collide with each other in their haste to escape, and she saw escape pods launched from dying vessels only to be picked off by Vreth fighters when it was over. Fewer than 50 ships had survived out of 900, and the Vreth fleet continued its advance without pause. The nearest inhabited system was the Sara 4, a minor agricultural colony with a population of 12 million people. And that was where the survivors fled. "They are following us," her tactical officer reported, his voice hollow with despair. 47 Vreth capital ships have broken off from the main fleet, and they will reach the Sara 4 approximately 6 hours after we arrive. Velith's mind raced through the calculations, and none of them offered any hope. The colony had perhaps 200 civilian transports that could be used for evacuation, and even if they loaded every ship beyond safe capacity, they might save 50,000 people. At most, the nearest reinforcements were at least 2 days away, even at maximum speed. 12 million people were going to die, and there was absolutely nothing she could do to stop it. She left the command deck and walked through the corridors of her wounded ship, and she did not know where she was going until she found herself at the observation deck where James was standing, exactly where she had left him. "We lost," she said, and her voice broke on the words. "We lost everything, and now 12 million innocent people are going to pay the price for our failure." James did not speak for a long moment, and when he did, his voice was calm and steady. "What assets do we have on the surface of the Sara 4? Valith shook her head because she did not understand why he was asking. "It does not matter," she said. "Nothing we have can stand against the Vreth ground forces." "What assets, Valith?" She stared at him, and she realized that he had used her name without her title for the first time since they had met. Garrison of 200 planetary defense troops," she said slowly. "A dozen atmospheric fighters, the colony emergency bunker system, and whatever weapons the colonists themselves might have. And the terrain? Mountains in the north and east, dense forests covering most of the continent. And the main colony is built into a valley with 3 primary access points." James nodded, and something changed in his face. "Something hard and sharp and dangerous. Then we can buy time," he said. "Maybe enough time for the reinforcements to arrive." "You do not understand," Valith said. "The Vreth are not like any enemy you have ever faced, and their warriors are twice the size of an Aldrani, and they feel no pain, and they do not stop until they are dead." "I understand perfectly," James replied, and he turned to face her fully. "I spent 15 years fighting wars on Earth before I became a diplomat, and I have held positions against enemies who outnumbered me 10 to 1, and I have watched friends die beside me, and I have done things that I will never speak of." He stepped closer, and his eyes held hers. "Humans are not strong. he said. "We are not fast or powerful or long-lived, and we have no natural weapons and no special abilities. But we have one thing that no other species in this galaxy seems to understand. What is that?" Valeth asked. "We do not give up," James said. "When everything is lost and all hope is gone and any rational being would accept defeat and walk away, humans dig in and fight harder, because surrender is not in our nature, and we would rather die on our feet than live on our knees." He walked past her toward the door. "I am going down to the surface," he said. "I am going to organize the defense and buy as much time as I can for the evacuation. And if the reinforcements do not arrive in time, then I will die with the people I am trying to protect." He paused at the door and looked back at her. "You can stay up here and watch if you want, or you can help coordinate the evacuation from orbit. But either way, I need you to do one thing for me." "What?" Valeth asked. "Do not give up," James said. "No matter what happens down there, no matter what you see, do not give up, because as long as someone is still fighting, there is still hope." He left, and Valeth stood alone in the observation deck, and she realized that she had been wrong about him from the very beginning. He was not weak at all. He was simply a different kind of strong. James Chun landed on the Sara IV with nothing but a rifle and a determination that burned like fire in his chest. The colony was in chaos when he arrived, and people were running through the streets and screaming and crying, and the local authorities had no idea what to do because nothing in their training had prepared them for this. He found the garrison commander, an Aldrani captain named Vorath, in the central administration building, and the captain looked at him with a mixture of confusion and disbelief. "You are the human," Vorath said, "the one who married Admiral Sorenthar." "I am," James replied, "and I am here to help organize the defense of this colony." Vorath laughed, but there was no humor in it. "What defense?" he asked. "We have 200 soldiers and a handful of fighters against an army of Wrath warriors. And even if we had 10 times that number, it would not be enough. Then we will have to be creative." James said, "Show me the maps of the valley." Vorath stared at him for a long moment, and then shrugged, and led him to the tactical room because he had no better ideas, and at least this human seemed to have a plan. James studied the maps carefully, and he asked questions about every hill and every river and every building in the colony, and slowly a strategy began to form in his mind. "The valley has 3 access points," he said. "The northern pass, the eastern canyon, and the southern road. And the Wrath will have to come through one of these, because the mountains on either side are too steep for their landing craft. So we defend all 3, Vorath said, "and we get overwhelmed in all 3, because we do not have enough soldiers to hold even one." "No," James replied. "We do not try to hold them, because you are right that we cannot win a straight fight. But we do not need to win. We only need to delay." He pointed to various locations on the map. "We mine these areas here and here, and we set up automated turrets at these choke points. And we create fallback positions along these ridges. And every time the Wrath advance, we make them pay in blood, and then we fall back to the next position." "They will still break through eventually," Vorath said. "Yes," James agreed, "but every hour we delay them is another hour for the evacuation. And every 1,000 Wrath we kill is 1,000 fewer to chase the transports." Vorath looked at the map and then looked at James, and something in his expression shifted from skepticism to something that might have been respect. "You have done this before," he said. "I have," James replied. "Not against the Wrath. But war is war, no matter the enemy. And the principles are always the same." They worked through the night, and James was everywhere at once, and he directed the placement of mines and the construction of barricades and the positioning of the few fighters they had. These colonists watched him with wonder because they had never seen a human move with such purpose, and they had never heard a human speak with such authority by morning. The defenses were ready, and they were not much, but they were something. James gathered the garrison soldiers in the central square, and he looked at their faces, and he saw fear and doubt, and he knew that he had to give them something more than a battle plan. "I know what you are thinking," he said. "You are thinking that this is hopeless, and that we are all going to die, and that nothing we do will make any difference." The soldiers shifted uncomfortably, because that was exactly what they were thinking. "You might be right," James continued. "The Vreth are strong, and they are many, and we are few. But I want you to think about something before you decide to give up." He pointed toward the evacuation ships that were lifting off in the distance. "Every minute we hold this valley is another minute for those ships to escape," he said. "Every minute is another 1,000 people who might live because we did not run. And even if we all die here today, our deaths will have meaning because we gave others the chance to survive." He looked at each of them in turn. "I'm not going to lie to you and tell you that we will win," he said, "but I'm going to tell you that humans have faced impossible odds before, and we have stood our ground because that is who we are. And today I am asking you to stand with me." One of the Alderney soldiers, a young female with pale blue scales, raised her hand. "Why do you fight?" she asked. "This is not your world, and these are not your people. So why do you care?" James smiled sadly. "Because someone has to," he said. "Because every life has value, and every person deserves a chance. And because I made a promise to someone that I would never give up no matter how dark things became." He thought of Valith watching from orbit, and he wondered if she was proud of him, or if she still thought of him as a weak and temporary thing. "The Vreth will be here in less than an hour," he said. "So let us get to our positions and show them what happens when they threaten people under our protection." The soldiers moved out, and James took his position at the northern pass, because that was where the first attack would come above him in orbit. Valith watched through the drone feeds, and she coordinated the evacuation, and she felt something strange growing in her chest that she did not recognize at first. It was hope. The first Vreth drop pods hit the valley floor as the sun rose over the mountains. In the battle for the Sara 4 began, the enemy came in waves, and they were terrible to behold. Towering insectoid creatures with armored bodies and razor-sharp claws and eyes that held no mercy or compassion. But James had prepared well, and the mines tore through the first wave, and the automated turrets cut down the second, and by the time the Vreth reached the first defensive line, they had already lost hundreds of warriors. The fighting was brutal and close, and James moved among his soldiers, and he pulled the wounded to safety, and he held the line when others faltered, and he killed Vreth with rifle and blade in bare hands when he had nothing else. Hour after hour the battle raged, and position after position was lost and retaken and lost again, and the defenders fell one by one, but they did not break. Valith watched from above, and she saw her husband do things that should have been impossible for a human, and she began to understand what he had meant when he said that humans did not give up. 12 hours into the battle, James received a message from the evacuation coordinator. 8 million people have been evacuated so far, the coordinator said, but the transports are running out of fuel, and we need at least another 12 hours to save everyone. James looked at his remaining forces. Less than 50 soldiers still standing, and he knew that they could not hold for another 12 hours, but he also knew that he would not stop trying. "Keep loading the ships," he said. "We will buy you as much time as we can." He turned back to the battle and raised his rifle and continued to fight, because that was all he knew how to do. And somewhere above him, Valith made a decision that would change everything. She ordered her remaining ships to descend into the atmosphere and provide fire support from above, because she would not let him fight alone, not anymore. The third day of the battle dawned gray and cold, and the valley was choked with smoke and fire, and the bodies of the fallen James had not slept in over 60 hours, and his body was a map of wounds and bruises, and his uniform was more red than its original color, but he was still standing, and he was still fighting. The Vreth had learned to fear the northern pass because that was where the human fought, and every assault they sent against it came back broken and bleeding. They had tried to overwhelm him with numbers, and he had turned the narrow passage into a killing ground where their numbers meant nothing. They had tried to outflank him, and he had anticipated every move and met them with fire and steel. They had tried to wait him out, and he had used the time to strengthen his defenses and set new traps. Now they were trying something different. Lilith watched from her command deck as a single Vreth warrior approached the northern pass under a flag of truce, and she immediately opened a channel to James. "They want to talk," she said. "Be careful." "I see them," James replied, his voice rough with exhaustion. "Keep the guns ready, but hold your fire." He stepped out from behind his barricade and walked forward to meet the Vreth warrior, and Valith held her breath as she watched the drone feed. The Vreth that approached was massive, easily 3 meters tall, and its body was covered in black armor that gleamed like oil in the dim light, and its eyes burned with an inner fire that spoke of ancient hunger. "You are the human," it said, and its voice was like rocks grinding together. "I am," James replied. "And you are?" "I am Vriketh, war commander of the 7th Swarm, and I have come to offer you terms." James laughed, and it was a tired and broken sound. "Terms?" he asked. "Your people do not offer terms. You devour and destroy and leave nothing behind. So why would I believe anything you say?" Vriketh tilted its massive head and regarded James with something that might have been curiosity. "You have cost us greatly." "Human," it said. "We have lost 8,000 warriors in this valley, and that is more than we have lost in any single battle since the Great War 1,000 years ago. Then you should turn around and leave." James said, "Because I have no intention of stopping. That is why I am here." Vriketh replied, "My masters wish to understand you because you do not behave like any species we have encountered before." "What do you mean?" "You are weak," Vriketh said. "Your body is fragile, and your life is short, and you have no natural weapons or defenses. And yet you fight as if you were the strongest creature in the galaxy. Strength is not just about muscles and claws." James said, "It is about will and determination, and the refusal to accept defeat." "But why do you refuse?" Vriketh asked. "Your forces are broken, and your position is hopeless, and you have no chance of victory. So why do you continue to fight when any rational being would surrender?" James was silent for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice was soft, but it carried clearly across the distance between them. "Do you see those ships lifting off in the distance?" he asked. Vriketh turned to look at the evacuation transports climbing into the sky. "Behind me are 12 million people who want nothing more than to live their lives in peace." James said, "They are farmers and teachers and children, and they have done nothing to deserve what you would do to them." "They are prey," Vriketh said, "as all beings are prey to the Vreth." "No," James said, "they are people, and I made a promise to protect them. And as long as I'm breathing, I will not break that promise." "You will die," Vriketh said. "You cannot hold this pass forever." James smiled, and there was blood on his teeth. "Maybe," he said, "but I do not have to hold it forever. I only have to hold it long enough, and every hour you spend trying to get past me is another hour for those ships to escape." "We will overwhelm you with numbers," Vriketh said. "We will send 1,000 warriors against you at once, and you will fall." "Then send them," James said, "and I will kill as many as I can before I fall. And the ones who survive will know that they faced a human, and they will remember what that means." Vriketh was silent for a long moment. "You truly do not fear death," it said at last. "I fear many things," James replied. "I fear failing the people who are counting on me. And I fear leaving my wife before I have the chance to tell her what she means to me. But death? He shook his head. Death is just the price we pay for standing up when others would kneel. Your wife, Rika said. The Aldrani admiral who watches from above? Yes, she is lucky to have such a mate. James laughed again, and this time there was real humor in it. She did not think so when we first met, he said. She thought I was weak and temporary and beneath her notice. And maybe she was right about some of that. But I hope that before this is over, she will understand that humans are not weak. We are just different. Rika studied him for another long moment, and then it did something that James did not expect. It bowed. I have met many warriors in my long life, Rika said, and I have respected none of them as much as I respect you. And though we are enemies, and I will kill you if I can, I want you to know that your name will be remembered among the Vreth as one who faced us without fear. I do not want to be remembered, James said. I just want those people to survive. Then we shall see if you can make that happen, Rika said. And it turned and walked back toward its army. James returned to his position and prepared for what he knew would be the final assault. An hour later, the Vreth came with everything they had, and the northern pass became a storm of fire and blood, and screaming James fought like a demon. Possessed, and he killed and killed and killed until his rifle was empty, and then he killed with his pistol, and when that was empty, he killed with his knife, and when his knife broke, he killed with his bare hands. One by one the other defenders fell until James was the last one standing, and still he did not retreat. The Vreth sent wave after wave against him, and he broke them all in the pile of bodies in front of his position grew higher and higher until it formed a wall of its own above him. Valith wept as she watched, and she screamed orders at her gunners to give him covering fire, and she prayed to gods she had not believed in for centuries to please let him survive. 6 hours James held that pass alone, 6 hours of constant fighting, without rest or relief. 6 hours during which another 2 million people escaped to safety when the reinforcements finally arrived. A fleet of 200 Aldrani warships that dropped out of hyperspace like avenging angels. James was still standing. He was covered in blood, both his own and that of his enemies. And his armor was in tatters, and he had a dozen wounds that should have killed him. But he was still standing the Vreth fleet. Seeing the approaching reinforcements and calculating the cost of continuing the battle, began to withdraw. The Battle of the Sara, the fourth, was over, and the human had won. Valith was running before her shuttle even touched the ground, and she did not care that her officers were calling after her, or that the battlefield was still dangerous, or that an admiral should maintain dignity at all times. She only cared about reaching the northern pass where James had made his stand. The valley was a nightmare of destruction and death, and the ground was covered with the bodies of Vreth warriors so thick that she could not walk without stepping on them. She counted as she ran, and she stopped counting when she reached 1,000 because there were too many to count. When she finally reached the pass, she found James sitting with his back against the barricade, and he was still alive, but only barely. His eyes were closed and his breathing was shallow, and he was so covered in blood that she could barely recognize him. James, she said, and her voice broke on his name. James, can you hear me? His eyes opened slowly, and when he saw her, he smiled, and it was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. Hey, he said, and his voice was barely a whisper. Did they make it? The transports? Tears were streaming down Villa's face, and she did not try to stop them. 11,700,000, she said. You saved almost all of them. Good, he said. That is good. His eyes started to close, and Valith grabbed his hand. Do not you dare, she said. Do not you dare die on me now. Not after everything you have done. Not before I have the chance to tell you. Tell me what? He asked. that I was wrong. She said, about everything, about you, about humans, about what strength really means. James laughed weakly and then coughed, and the cough was wet and terrible. You are not completely wrong, he said. Humans are fragile. We do die easily. We burn so bright because we do not have long. He reached up with a trembling hand and touched her face. But that is why we fight so hard, he said. Every moment matters. Every life matters. We cannot afford to waste any of it. I wasted so much time. Valeth said, I was so proud and so foolish, and I looked down on you when I should have been learning from you. You have plenty of time to learn, James said. You will live for centuries more, and he paused and winced with pain. I will be lucky to see another 50 years, even if I survive this. Then I will make every one of those years count. Valeth said, I swear to you, James, I will never look down on you again. I will never take you for granted. I will spend every day of whatever time we have together showing you how much you mean to me. James smiled again. I love you too, he said. I think I loved you from the moment I saw you, even when you hated me, even when you thought I was nothing. I never hated you, Valeth said. I was just afraid of how you made me feel. Afraid of caring for someone whose life was so short. Afraid of the pain I would feel when I lost you. You will lose me eventually. James said, that is the price of loving a human. Then it is a price I am willing to pay. Valeth said, 1,000 times over. The medical teams arrived and they rushed James to the emergency treatment center, and Valeth stayed with him through every surgery and every transfusion and every long night. When the doctors told her that he might not survive, but he did survive because that was what humans did. 3 months later, when James was finally able to walk again, the Emperor himself came to visit them. He found them in the gardens of the healing center where James was taking his first steps without assistance, and Valeth was walking beside him with a protective hand ready to catch him if he fell. Commander Chun, the Emperor said, or should I say Lord Chun, hero of the Sahara, defender of the valley, slayer of 8,000. James looked uncomfortable with the titles. Just James is fine, he said. I am not much for ceremony. Nevertheless, the Emperor said, you have done more for this empire than any single warrior in living memory. And the people are calling you a legend. I did not do it for glory, James said. I did it because it was the right thing to do. And that is exactly why you deserve the glory. The Emperor said, because you did not seek it. He turned to Valeth. I came to tell you something important. He said, in light of recent events and the growing threat from the Vreth, the Council has decided that we need strong leadership now more than ever. Valeth bowed her head. I am ready to serve in whatever capacity you require, she said. I am glad to hear that. The Emperor said, because I am naming you as my heir, and when I step down next year, you will become Empress. Valeth looked up in shock. Your Majesty, I do not know what to say. Say yes, the Emperor said, and say that you will keep your human husband by your side. Because if recent events have taught us anything, it is that the Aldrani have much to learn from humans. He looked at James. The Vreth have requested a ceasefire, he said. They say they have no interest in fighting an enemy who would die to the last soldier for people they do not even know. And I believe you are the reason for that. James shook his head. I did not do anything special, he said. Any human would have done the same. And that, the Emperor said, is exactly what makes your species so remarkable. 1 year later, Valeth stood before the assembled representatives of 100 species and accepted the crown of the Aldrani Empire. James stood beside her, his hair now touched with gray from the stress of his recovery, his body still bearing the scars of the battle. And when she looked at him, she saw everything she had ever wanted and everything she had been too blind to see before. I once thought strength meant living forever, she said to the assembly. I thought it meant power and ships and the ability to destroy. But I was wrong. She took James's hand. Strength is knowing you will lose and fighting anyway. She said, strength is standing alone against an army because someone has to. Strength is loving so fiercely that death itself seems a small price to pay. She looked out at the gathered delegates. Humanity taught me that. She said, one human taught me that, and I will spend the rest of my long life being grateful for every moment I have with him. The assembly erupted in applause, and James squeezed her hand. You know, he said quietly, when I first came aboard your ship, I never imagined it would end like this. Neither did I. Valeth replied, I thought you were weak and temporary and beneath me. And now? She turned to look at him, this small, fragile human, who had changed her entire world. Now I know that you are the strongest person I have ever met. She said, and I will love you until the stars go dark. In the gallery above, a young Vreth diplomat turned to his companion. The humans, he said. They are truly as the stories say. His companion, a veteran who had been at the Sara, nodded slowly. The stories do not do them justice, he said. They burn so bright because they know their time is short, and that makes them more dangerous than any species in the galaxy. Should we fear them? The veteran was silent for a long moment. No, he said finally. Fear them, and they will give you reason to fear. But stand beside them? He watched as the human and the Aldrani Empress walked hand in hand from the chamber. Stand beside them, and they will move the stars for you. And somewhere across the galaxy, on a world called Earth, humans continued to live their short and brilliant lives, unaware that they had become legends, unaware that one of their own had taught an empire what it truly meant to be strong, unaware that the galaxy would never look at them the same way again, because that was the thing about humans they never saw themselves as special. They just did what needed to be done, and that made all the difference.